a three-step system for getting arm drags to work. Three prerequisites without which no arm drag will work. The first step is to get our opponent's hand lower than our shoulder. I'll explain this very shortly. This is essential. It is a necessary condition to get the hand lower than the shoulder. A desirable element is also to fix the hand in place. In general, arm drags are more difficult the more mobility our opponent has in the hand. So if we can, fixing the hand in place is highly desirable, but not essential. You can hit a successful arm drag without fixing the hand in place, but what is essential is that the hand, your opponent's hand, be lower than your shoulder. Okay, so that's step number one. Get your opponent's hand lower than the shoulder. Step number two is going to be getting shoulder to shoulder contact. You're going to see that in the standing position, you have a choice between inside shoulder and outside shoulder. And then third, you must get hip to hip with your training partner, your opponent in a match. Those three prerequisites in that order: getting your opponent's hand lower than your shoulder, and if possible, fixing it in place. Then secondly, getting your opponent shoulder to shoulder with yourself. And then thirdly, getting hip to hip with your opponent. If you can get those three prerequisites in order, you're going to be highly successful with arm drags. Let's have a look at how this works in a classroom setting. Okay, if we have guy in stance in front of us, if Placido's hand is higher than my shoulder, there's simply no arm drag. Okay, the only way you're going to arm drag someone is to force their hand underneath your armpit, and from here you can go in and start dragging people. So if our opponent's hands are higher than our shoulder, say for example a collar tie, a shoulder pose, that's a problem where you have to be able to bring it down. Not only do you have to bring it down, but a simple rule here is the lower the better. This is good enough. His hand is lower than my armpit, so you could hit an arm drag here. But even better is where the hand is right down here. Okay, where the arm is straight and vertical downwards. That provides a better purchase on our training partner's shoulder to get into our drags. You will notice the more extended my opponent's arm is, the more slippery and the less purchase that I have on my training partner's arm, the more liable his arm is to slip when he pulls. But when the arm is perpendicular to the mat, when he goes to pull his body back now, it's very, very difficult. The way he becomes slippery is to raise the hand up, and that's when your purchase tends to slide off. So we can introduce some simple rules here. First, the essential factor is that my opponent's hand be lower than my armpit. There's simply no arm drag when the hand is above the shoulder. You can't even get started. So that's always our first thing. This is essential. And highly desirable is the idea of holding our opponent's hand in place. Why is this such a big deal? Well, if I have an arm drag grip here and Placido just takes his fist up to his shoulder, when I go to pull, you lose purchase on the arm. So we want that hand controlled and fixed in place. Again, if I don't control it, he can just curl his arm up and pull away. But when I fix the hand in place and he goes to curl the arm up, it ain't going anywhere. And that's going to make it a highly effective arm drag. Okay. And also the idea that the closer or the further the hand goes down below the shoulder, the better. When the arm is relatively extended like so, if an opponent pulls back, you often lose purchase on the arm. But when the arm is low and the shoulder high, that's when we get a really good purchase on our training partner's arm and pull the man through. So step number one in all these situations is always going to be to get our opponent's hand lower than the shoulder. And if possible, fix it in place. The easiest way to fix it in place for most people is some form of wrist control. Because when we control the wrist in here, okay, when he goes to pull his arm away, it's held in place. That will make for very successful arm drags. Okay? So we want to fix that arm in place and get the arm as close to perpendicular to the mat as possible. The closer it is there, the better the purchase you have on your opponent's arm. The second big element that we're always going to be pushing is shoulder-to-shoulder contact. The further my shoulder is from my opponent's shoulder, even if I did get the grip, the distance that I have to traverse to get in gives him reaction time. So that as I attempt to drag, he could just yank his arm out or circle around and now re-drag me, and then cause problems for me. Okay? So what I want to do is to cover the minimum amount of distance. I would suggest forehead to forehead is the minimum distance. Okay? When you're forehead to forehead, the chances of you getting shoulder to shoulder contact is very, very high. A trick which we often do is to give our opponent inside head position. This brings us so close, my shoulder to his. When we go to pull, you're almost certain to get to your opponent's shoulder. And another method we use is this. We wrestle ear to ear. And from ear to ear, it's very easy for us to go in and get a hold of our that shoulder-to-shoulder contact. So let's quickly summarize this. When we work with a training partner, the step number one is to ensure that his hand is lower than our armpit at a minimum. And if possible, the arm perpendicular and held in place by some mechanism like so. Then, secondly, shoulder-to-shoulder contact. Stand back in stance. The further his shoulder is from mine, the less likely it is I'm going to get to my grips, and the less likely it is I'm going to complete. So at a minimum, I should be forehead to forehead, ear to ear, or even give him an inside head position. It's a trick my students use all the time. And that's going to make the distance between my shoulder and his close down, so that from here, we could go in and get to that shoulder-to-shoulder position. The third big prerequisite, you have to get hip to hip. It doesn't matter if I take his hand lower than the shoulder and then get shoulder-to-shoulder contact. If he can rotate his hip away from mine, then he can re-drag me, and you can end up, on the losing end of the bargain. We have to get hip to hip. In standing position, you have the choice between using your outside hip to get hip to hip, or stepping with your inside hip to get hip to hip. Either will work, okay? Down on the ground, it's almost always inside hip. So those are the three essential prerequisites to arm dragging. First, you got to get your opponent's hand lower than your armpit, lower than your shoulder. Without that, there's not even a chance of success. And highly desirable is to fix your opponent's hand in place. This can be done with wrist control. We'll look at other methods very, very shortly. The closer our opponent's arm is to perpendicular to the mat, the better the purchase you have on the arm. Remember, an arm that's parallel with the mat, you have very little purchase. But an arm that's perpendicular with the mat, you have tremendous purchase and can easily get through to the leg. We have to get shoulder-to-shoulder contact. When we're shoulder-to-shoulder, that enables us to start turning the corner on an opponent. The further my shoulder from his, the harder it is for me to control this side. Our recommendation is we start forehead to forehead. That's a good marker. Another one is ear to ear. That closes the distance appreciably. Or his head and your neck. They will all create situations where the distance of the shoulder, from his shoulder to my shoulder, is so small that you'll be able to get through to your position every time. And the third big thing, you've got to get hip to hip to complete the move. Anytime we're in this position, we've got to get our hip right up to his, either my inside hip or my outside hip. When we're locked in hip to hip, that's when we can start bringing people reliably down to the mat and completing the move. So those are always going to be our big three prerequisites for success. We've got to get that hand down below our shoulder at a minimum, and preferably fix it in place. We've got to be able to get shoulder-to-shoulder contact, and we have to be able to get hip to hip. They occur in that sequence, 1, 2, 3, and a successful arm drag will require all three.